Hey, what's happening, Danielle? Thanks for coming on today.
Hi, Adam. Thanks for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
We were just saying this conversation's been long overdue, so we're and just joking. We should have been doing this at 5 o'clock, having a glass of wine instead. But 10 a.m. on a Thursday morning will do just fine.
Yes.
Can you give a little color to the audience, to our listeners? Just say a brief overview of how you got into sports nutrition and dietetics.
Sure. To go way back, it started in college. I was cheerleading at Central Michigan, and we had all these physical fitness tests that we had to do. And I really didn't have a ton of upper body strength. I was more of a dance, jazz, competitively ballet, and a track and cross country runner in high school. So it was really hard. So I got with a personal trainer, and he would always joke that I should do fitness competitions when I was done with college. And I thought, oh gosh, I don't know if I can do this. And we picked one and I signed up, and it was fantastic. And I met with a dietitian to drop some body fat and eat appropriately, and it was amazing. People were amazed about how much I was eating. I was like 23, 24, eating like 3,600 calories a day and just dropping body fat. It was amazing. It was the best I'd ever felt. I'd gotten off my coffee and all my Diet Coke, and I was sleeping and getting through my workouts. And I thought, wow, there's something to this nutrition. So it propelled me to go back to school. So instead of going for my master's in business, I went back for a master's in nutrition and food science. And after graduating, I started working. I did some consulting work at gyms, and I worked at Lifetime Fitness. And then I moved from Michigan out to Arizona and took a job with Exos, Athletes Performance at the time. And from there, I got introduced to a bunch of different populations, from military to pro elite athletes, Olympic athletes, education, traveled around the world, met a bunch of different highly regarded and respected strength coaches, PTs. It was a really great experience. And so through that, I spent 3 years with the U.S. men's national soccer team, traveling with them down to the World Cup in 2014 to Brazil. I spent 6 seasons with the San Francisco Giants. So I was with them during the 2012 and their 2014 World Series. I spent some time with the Coyotes, the Arizona Coyotes hockey, and Arizona Cardinals football, and then worked with some various other MLS teams like Sporting KC, and then Club America in Mexico. I did a little bit with rugby. So it was really fantastic. And then I went on my own and started getting more into integrative and functional nutrition and how I could work that into the sports performance realm. And then I started with the Phoenix Suns and spent 4 years with them. And I'm currently a free agent looking for my next opportunity.
Isn't free agency wonderful?
It's amazing. I have been enjoying it wholeheartedly this summer.
And well deserved too, because you've been around for a long time. You've been across the world in some really cool spots. And one question, I'm just really curious on your perspective, or your bias, I should say, is what was more enjoyable, going to the World Series or going to the World Cup?
And I would want to say the World Series, because I was contracting with them. I was able to come as a guest for the World Series in 2014, and I got to go to games 3, 4, and 5 in San Francisco. So, and I didn't have to worry about going into the clubhouse or getting anything ready. I put all my plans together, gave it to my staff, and they ran it for me. So that was probably the most fun. Whereas the World Cup, I was pretty stressed out, making sure that no one got food poisoning, and 5 hours of sleep for 7.5 weeks. And yes, so it was kind of hard to enjoy the World Cup when I was working like that.
So on one hand, you got to almost have a VIP experience with the direct club access in the World Series. And on the other hand, you are in the dog days of Brazil, summer, under the pressure of head coach Jurgen Klinsmann, which ran a tight ship, and all the pressures that come of working in international soccer at that stage.
Yes. And then I would have to leave like towards the end of the games to go blend smoothies and make sure all the guys had their hydration drinks and all that stuff. So I would miss a lot of the excitement at the end of the games. So
you tapped into some cool stuff that you do relative to integrative and functional side. I know we're not going to spend too much time talking there, but I know that is the next frontier and what kind of excites people of sports dietitians and nutrition. But at the same time, you just alluded to, you'd have to leave a game early to go make smoothies. So in the world of sports and team sports and working as a sports nutritionist, sports dietitian, and by the way, you are a dietitian. I want to be very clear. There is a clear distinction between nutritionist and dietitian. You are a sports dietitian. What are some of the unexpected or unknown roles and responsibilities of sports dietitian in sports? And I asked this question coming in the context for those that are interested in sports dietitian, those that want to work in nutrition in sports, dietitian in sports. It's always important to highlight the dog days and what it really is in the trenches beyond the exciting stuff of integrative and functional dietetics. What are some of those dog days in the trenches, roles and responsibilities for a dietitian?
Yeah, so I guess it also all depends on what you kind of gravitate towards. So a dietitian will do nutrition consults, correct? And all the assessment. We can analyze labs. We get that training in our clinical sessions in school and through our internships. We can do food service. So we have a broad overall perspective of how a kitchen is run, should be run, what the culinary team should be composed of, how that works. And then, of course, how to put the meals together, and then the food sensitivities and the allergies and labs to even what's the word I'm looking for, to tighten it up or get very, very detailed in those meals in order to stay in with what we're seeing in the labs, what any signs or symptoms are that they have. We're also educated in hydration and sweat testing, so we can work on that. Supplementation, we're very educated on that. It came from, I remember back in school, it was, no, supplements are not necessary, don't use them. But I was always opposite of that because I thought, well, people are doing it. We should know what's going on and why. And is there some research behind some of this stuff? And there is. So really understanding and owning all of that, owning the body composition and weigh-ins. And I feel like I'm missing something. So there are a lot of different areas that we all work in. Sometimes, like for me, food service isn't one of my favorite. I don't like developing menus. I do it because I know what to do, but I have a colleague. She's a sports diet. She loves that part of the job. She loves the food service. She loves doing all that. I noticed that I've gravitated more into the science and the labs and really looking at all of that and kind of hoping to put stuff together that will then, go into a menu, a personalized menu, not something for the entire team. So, and then you notice in different sports that depending, like football is going to be your least, I would say, in terms of food service, because you just have one spot that you're at all day long, the practice facility, and you have one game a week. Whereas hockey and baseball and basketball, you have your 160 some games, your 80 some games, you're traveling all over the place. So now you have to look at all the different spots that you have to get your hand on the food service. And that then takes you away from the nutrition consulting and the lab analysis and diving deeper into nutrition practices. So, it all depends. And I learned over the years that I really do like more of the science than I do the food service and menu development. However, it's extremely important. Does that kind of answer your question?
Absolutely, because it's
okay.
Like similar to, right, like you and I worked in sports for a very long time, and we know that it's not just the role that your title is or your credentials or what you went to school for you're most interested in. There's always this like wide gamut of things you have to do. And I don't think as many people have experienced the breadth of experiences that you have. And I just think it's important to highlight that across different sports, like you said, there's different needs. Like it didn't dawn on me, the NFL, when you play once a week, hey, probably food service isn't that high. But when working in the NBA, I'm very familiar with how much time that was consuming for you to plan out menus in different cities. And when you have a playoff series, how do you jazz it up? Or, hey, players are saying the meals are getting stale. How do we spice things up but still accommodate to individual preferences and performance needs and rehab needs? And so I just thought you did a great job highlighting the breadth of what really goes on in that role in the team sports space. And you come from a spot of being knowledgeable, being practical in the science. And I think one of your greatest strengths, which is only comes with experience, is your ability to make practical advice for the players, taking that science, taking the lab values, and providing actionable steps. So let's go there from just a pragmatic perspective, and just say, what is your perspective when you try to include all the science and individual needs? How do you provide practical advice when it comes to sports dietetics and nutrition?
It's nothing fancy or sexy. I really constantly keep the KISS principle in my head, because I can tend to also go over and above and make things complicated. And as I review what I'm going to say, I'm still 8 out of 10 times like, this is way too much. I got to pick 2 things, maybe even 1 thing, and just stick with it. Because yes, it's a lot. And sometimes looking at labs and looking at the inflammation and the oxidative stress and everything that's going on, and they need to add more vegetables and they don't want to because they don't like it. And then the travel schedule, and they've already developed these crazy habits. So it's, how do I work on behavior change? So yeah, I guess I kind of look at everything, see what their goals are, and give them options. Like, here are a few things that we can do. And I always ask them on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 being, no, there's no way, I don't want to do this. And 5 being, oh yeah, that's super simple. And if they can answer a 4 or a 5 to a couple of my suggestions, then that's the one we're going to go with.
I imagine the stool test is probably a 0 or a 1. And then, having a cheat meal is probably on a 5.
Exactly.
What I want to do here is, because listen, you and I could probably sit here for multiple hours and just have some really deep dives. But what I want to do is dial in an area where you and I, our paths crossed over recent years, and it was stemming around the world of rehab. We had, you talk about surgery, you talk about long-term injuries, you talk about short-term injuries. And we know when it comes to managing inflammation in the rehab process is needed, but the chronic inflammation may be problematic. So really want to go with you is, you've done a great job helping me learn when it comes to certain injury types, when it comes to certain tissue types, short-term versus long-term, what's the best nutrition strategies to optimize healing, and then also optimize the retraining, reloading process. Like, that's where I want to go today. And so let's go with a broad stroke. And what I want to ask this question is, how critical is nutrition in the rehabilitation process for an athlete?
So, of course, I'm going to say it's extremely, extremely important. You've got your raw material. So we always talk big picture, macronutrients, protein, carbs, fats. Well, you need to make sure you have enough protein on board, because yes, protein goes to muscle mass. That's what we always talk about, but it's important for enzymes and neurotransmitters and hormones, and all the other things are your complements to making sure that that muscle grows and stays, and that the healing process is happening appropriately. And in a timely fashion. If your nutrition is on point, you can help to decrease that inflammation, right? You can help improve your overall immune system. It will then, because we are trying to improve muscle mass, so preventing muscle loss, it can help with bone healing. So all of these things that, if we can dial in the nutrition and make sure that, they're eating well and they're getting all their necessary nutrients, we can recover. Sometimes I don't know. Yeah, we can recover quicker, or maybe in the correct time frame, instead of it being prolonged, and we'll have a stronger, more resilient athlete coming out of that, and the potential to decrease their risk of re-injury.
Excellent. Okay, we got to figure a way to organize this conversation. So I think here's what we do. Here's where we want to take this is, I want to get to the granular level of different injuries relative to tissue type, because you've done a great job creating some protocols, creating some systems in place of saying, hey, bone injury versus muscle injury versus tendon injury, here are some strategies we want to do. But you hit on the basics of macronutrients and total caloric intake. And so the first topic I want to discuss is, when you have activity participation go down during the rehab process, caloric intake is probably the first question we want to ask or review with our athletes, because if activity is going down, what we don't want to do is, we don't want to have excessive calories, and now we're putting on unnecessary weight that then we have to even work harder to take off during the retraining process. So the first layer, I think high level we should start at, is when activity level decreases during the initial rehab phase to allow for unloading and healing to happen, what is the first step to do to appropriately provide the right amount of calories with respect to the macronutrients needed to optimize healing?
Sure. I think you touched on it. We definitely want to adjust those a bit. And that's going to be, of course, chatting with them, seeing what they're doing, and just taking a little bit away. We still want multiple meals throughout the day, 4 to 6, because number one, you can't absorb all your nutrients in one time. I know there's some stuff on protein right now, and now they're saying, based on how they've structured this research, the big bolus doses, that's fine. But okay, great. But we still have certain vitamins, zinc, B, whatever other micronutrients, they can't be absorbed all at one meal. So that's another reason why we want to have multiple meals throughout the day. And then we'll just take a little bit out of each meal to help adjust those overall calories. And then sure, we could cut back on the carbohydrates a little bit. Maybe if the athlete, and now we're talking, so I'm going to talk a perfect day, a perfect picture, 100% we're doing all this. The ideal athlete is going to take a little bit, is eating 4 to 6 times a day, taking a little bit of food out of each meal. Yes, we can decrease the starchy carbs and then try to increase color on those plates. So maybe it's an extra serving of fruit because we've cut back on the starchy carbs, because that fruit's going to give us fiber, antioxidants, vitamins, yada, yada, yada. Same thing with extra vegetables and whatnot throughout the day. So now we're getting those extra antioxidants and whatnot to help with the healing process, oxidative stress, the inflammation that can trip them up and prolong that healing process.
There's two words I want to double click on that you hit on, and that was protein intake and then antioxidants, because protein intake is necessary for rebuilding during the maturation phases of just biological healing, but then also the antioxidant component to help manage the acute inflammation. Like I said, I firmly believe that inflammation is necessary in an acute injury. Like there's a reason why that process exists and it's endured the evolution of humans. But at some point, we probably want to taper that back. So let's start with protein and talk about the importance of why protein is important, not only from tissue healing, but also lean muscle mass management during the decreased activity period.
Sure. So yeah, it really ends up staying the same. I've always done, and it's been helpful for the majority of my athletes, somewhere around 0.8 to 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. And it's easier to say that I took the kilograms and figure out a way to make it into pounds per body weight. And so you're really going to keep that the same during the recovery, post-surgery, and all of that. And keeping that up is just what we're talking about, maintaining that tissue, that muscle mass, but also the support system, right? Your enzymes, your hormones, all the other things that protein goes towards, that will also be a part of that rehabilitation and decreasing inflammation, supporting recovery process. So protein will basically just stay the same from activity into rehab or
when it comes
surgery.
When it comes to the recommendation around, let's stick to easy math, 1 gram per body mass.
Pound.
Is it
per
pound? Okay. Yep. So is it, I was always confused on this, and I'm glad we're talking about this. If I have a DEXA scan of an athlete, and let's just use easy math, they weigh 200 pounds and their lean muscle mass is, let's say, 150 pounds. Sorry, their lean mass is 150 pounds. Are we basing that 1 gram per body mass on the 200 or on the 150?
Okay, so great question. So what I've done in my practice, so I guess this is where we start with, right? We're always big on evidence-based practice, but then also practice-based evidence. So my colleagues and I, back in the day at Athletes Performance Exos, and we came to, when we're putting together the meal plan that we're going to give to the chef or to the player, we would do that lean body mass then is like pure straight animal protein sources, your fish, your poultry, your beef, and then the rest of the protein to get up to that 200 pounds, right? So that 50 pounds, then we're looking at your vegetarian sources. So then helping them to start thinking about incorporating more beans and legumes and looking at, quinoa and other options to get in that protein.
Is there a difference? And we can either table this for another discussion. Is there a difference in the quality of protein when you talk about supplementation, such as like a whey isolate or a whey concentrate, or animal protein versus a vegetarian or vegan protein? Because I know you've had to deal with the gamut of lifestyle factors when it comes to conversations around protein. So just can you briefly touch upon if there are or if there not are differences in quality amongst those three main sources?
Yes. Right now, as far as I know, your whey protein isolate is going to be your best protein option for building and maintaining lean muscle mass. And it's because of the amino acid leucine. And leucine is not very high in our vegetarian options. So our grains and beans and legumes. And that's where it becomes an issue. However, you can now get the pea proteins and the brown rice proteins, and they'll add, a fermented vegan leucine to the product. And then as long as that's happening, then those sources will be fine. But that's where the whey and milk come in, is because of that leucine, and it stimulates that mTOR pathway to support muscle mass gains and building.
Perfect. Love that. I didn't realize they were doing the added leucine into some of those vegan and vegetarian products. That's super helpful. All right. So we talked about probably the most important factor of being calories, and then protein when it comes to when an injury happens or surgery happens. The next topic, if we're thinking about like the continuum of tissue healing and the rehab process, the next topic that comes to mind that you alluded to earlier was the role of antioxidants, either supplementation or the role of antioxidant high foods relative to the acute inflammation process and that subacute healing phase. Where does the role of antioxidants play when it comes to initial nutrition recommendations in rehab?
Okay. Now, real quick, I got that, but I do want to go back because I want to say, yes, everybody always talks about calories and protein. I don't want to discount carbohydrates because they are definitely going to be needed, especially during that healing process. Because if you don't have carbs on board, then your protein can't go and do its full job, because some of those amino acids will be converted into carbohydrates. So you still need some. So when I say cut back a little bit, and you still need some for that overall brain and mental health and clarity and whatnot. So we'll just skim back a little bit. We're not cutting out. Okay. So now back to, I got to say that because right? You talk to some people and carbs are the devil, and I get that. And at times sometimes we can manipulate things, but if it's all done properly and it's done correctly, then they should not be evil.
So let's double click back on the carbs though, since you brought it up. Let's go there. Right.
All right.
Because I think because I don't want to just skip that over, because I know you understand the value of that and the power of it, not just from a macronutrient perspective and preferences of I like to live low carb, high carb, no carb. Can you speak upon what you've learned in recent years from, and please correct me if my interpretation of this is wrong, but the value of or the role in carbohydrates when it comes to hormones, when it comes to overall health, because you've educated me on things and I found it super helpful. So I want to make sure we provide the right context and warrant the need for carbohydrates still during the rehab process.
Sure. I think we forget that, our red blood cells that's their main fuel of choice. So for them to stay healthy and turn over, every 3 to 4 months, it's needed. Carbohydrates, the brain, the majority fuel is carbohydrates. Now I get it in certain circumstances. Sure, we can get into ketogenic diets and we can eat into these things, but I think from a overall sustainability process, no, that's not. You have to have a really different mindset and really, really need to do it in order to be very, very, very consistent with that. And I just don't think that's for everybody, where I think 80% of athletes and people can, if done properly and including other things, carbohydrates are going to support your system. So talking about hormones and whatnot, carbs are extremely important for our adrenals and and for that recovery process. So if we don't have those on board, then certain metabolic systems in our body are going to go awry. And then that stress is really going to take hold. I hope I'm talking about it appropriately. I feel like I'm not. So yes, because carbs will help also too to mitigate that stress, because they're needed for that muscle glycogen replenishment and that liver glycogen replenishment, which the muscle and the brain use in order to function. And then, so then if they're not on board, it's going to be stealing from the protein, for instance. So then again, for people that do go to a ketogenic diet, then it's like, well, maybe we do that in the summer or a month before we're going to start getting into preseason. So then that way we can adjust our training protocols or, our training to adjust for the adjustment in the macros. And then once we flipped over to use that different system, we can go. But I don't think there's no matching of that, macros and calories when we try to do a different type of eating pattern or diet. But then overall, the stress and strain of the system, the flying, the late nights, activity and physical activity, as we all know, is supposed to prevent stress and whatnot, but it still generates stress. Now we've got all these things that are generating all this stress, and we might not have all of our micronutrients and or macronutrients on board. And now that stress could, then lead to injury, re-injury, reoccurrence.
So what I'm hearing when we talk about why carbohydrates are still necessary during the rehab process, although activity is going down, is if I'm understanding you correctly, if we remove the carbohydrate, that may induce some sort of extra stress that we may not want on the system from a biomolecular level, from a cellular level. Because what I heard you say is, hey, glycogen, glucose, those are preferred sources of fuel, red blood cells, brain, muscle. So perhaps we want, if we're trying to optimize the entire internal system, maybe we want to avoid that potential internal stress if we remove carbohydrates altogether.
Yes. You summarize that very well.
I'm a good listener.
I like my long-winded answers.
I do too. That's why you're here. It's great. You're a wealth of knowledge. So, okay, let's go back. We covered the protein, we covered the carbohydrates. Let's double click on this word and phrase, antioxidants. I think it's important for those that don't understand let's go high level. What is an antioxidant? And then let's integrate why maybe supplementing or dialing in the diet that are high in antioxidant foods, why it may be beneficial in the rehab process.
Yeah. So, right, your antioxidants, we hear about all these free radicals or these little guys that are, think of them as, little bugs that we don't want around, right? So we have this little bug eater to come around and grab them up and put them away. So our antioxidants, like our vitamin, we hear the term all the time, vitamin C, vitamin E, they help to basically your free radicals, now our more technical term, right? They have I might not even be able to say this. They have a missing free radical. They're unstable, right? So then your vitamin C, your vitamin E come over and they can quench that or merge with it in order to kind of engulf it. So it's not going to do anything to us anymore. And these antioxidants and this type of support system will help to mitigate oxidative stress, right? Like rust on a nail, and also to help keep our inflammation in check. So when we keep mitigate that oxidative stress and keep inflammation in check, then we have increased or faster tissue repair, decreased muscle soreness. What first comes to mind is think tart cherry juice, right? There's a lot of research on those tart, Montmorency, or sour cherries, whatever you want to call them, that has those certain anthocyanins, the big word for the blue and purple antioxidants that make up tart cherries and blueberries and whatnot that help to reduce delayed onset muscle soreness. These antioxidants can help with enhancing our immune system, right? We know that about vitamin C and vitamin E. And then, of course, overall, in the long term, will help to decrease chronic inflammation.
When it comes to an acute injury, are you recommending, hey, we want to increase the uptake of antioxidants right away? This is probably more of a theoretical or personal bias question. Do you want to get rid of the inflammation as quick as possible? Or are you in the camp, maybe we should just let the body do its thing for a few days, and then maybe 72-hour, 96-hour mark, maybe let's start pumping the antioxidants to help bring down the inflammation, to help optimize healing? What's your perspective on including antioxidants early or delayed from the initial onset of injury?
I'm camp delay, right? Like, let the body do what it needs to do. And then once that initial phase has happened, then get into the support, especially if the athlete has or had a poor diet before the injury has happened. Really really get in there and try to see what they're willing to do in terms of adjusting their eating habits and their diet, as well as any type of supplementation they could take in order to help that process.
You said a buzzword right there that I want to just as lead. It's great. Let's lead right into the next question. Supplementation, right? And there's one, we talked about food, or you talked about blueberries, you talked about tart cherry juice, wow, it's a tongue twister. I'm having a tough time. Tart cherry juice is probably the gold standard. We would want to say, hey, if you're going to add some sort of food product, you probably want to go there. But you talked about supplements because they're high concentrations of antioxidant themselves, or they have antioxidant effects. And there's three that come to mind. Actually, yeah, two that come to mind, and then there's a third one I want to ask you about. The first one is fish oil, in particular EPA and DHA, and then the second one is curcumin, which I also need you to help me remind me what the relationship is between curcumin and turmeric, because I think the public knows turmeric, not so much know about curcumin. So let's start with, from a supplementation perspective, when it comes to antioxidants themselves or antioxidant effects. EPA and DHA, aka fish oil, what is their role in managing inflammation?
So EPA, I would look at a real easy way. EPA is more vascular. It's going to help with, as an antioxidant, more anti-inflammatory more so than an antioxidant. These oils are going to help. They can act as anti-inflammatory oils in order to help calm that fire in the system. And EPA is really going to more be in the vasculature. And DHA is really going to help with overall brain health and inflammation in the brain. And so what's really great now is that we could test it. So we could really see, hey, is this a part of what's going on? And I know we'll talk about this in a little bit, but to bring it up here, where testing now can be very helpful. And you can do a finger prick for your fish oils now, or you could do just a blood draw phlebotomy. And then you can have that information. You could show the athlete, they could see their numbers, and depending on which lab you use, it can be color coded, green, yellow, red, which is also more impactful. And you could talk about, are they eating cold water fatty fish and seafood if they like it? And could they increase? Because sometimes I have seen for some, it's as easy as increasing their salmon to an extra 2 to 3 meals a week, or having them try a tuna steak or canned tuna. And that will improve their EPA and their DHA in the blood. And then again, research is very up and down, but we're in the hopes that it's going to help with mitigating their inflammation in their system by improving these oils in their body.
Perfect. How about curcumin and the relationship to turmeric?
So curcumin is what makes turmeric yellow. So think of curcumin as like creatine. So in order to get 1 gram of creatine, what do we need to do? Eat about 5 pounds or 1 pound of meat or something like that. So basically, it's kind of the same with turmeric, but I don't know what the dose is. So what we're doing, we're taking that, we're concentrating it, and that's what is also, so the curcumin is what makes turmeric yellow, and then it's also what has these anti-inflammatory, antioxidant properties to it. So we're just concentrating it into a smaller capsule.
So it's fair to say all the health smoothies that we see that are offering turmeric shots and turmeric in a smoothie or turmeric latte perhaps isn't a high enough dosage to even have a worthwhile change.
Maybe not. Yeah. And right, like, curries are extremely popular in the Indian culture, and that, and it's fantastic. And that could be why, right? Because then we can get into like bioactives, which is what curcumin is. We get into all that spice and all those things that maybe over time, that's why some people can, stay healthier, keep the inflammation down, because they're doing small doses daily on a regular basis over time, along with other herbs and spices. But yeah, if we're having some chronic inflammation, we're having someone that doesn't have a great diet, then we have our complement, essentially this curcumin, to come in and help us mitigate this. My goal over time, the years to come, is to really see, can we decrease the amount of NSAIDs that we're using and these strong prescribed anti-inflammatories, and maybe offset some of them with the fish oil, your SPMs, which are derivatives from your fish oil, and curcumin and a few other things to help keep that inflammation down. And then we're not destroying our gut integrity as much.
NSAIDs, do we want to go there?
I don't know. We can. We'll see. We'll see what I can muster up with some NSAIDs.
No, we'll put a pin in that one. Put a pin in that one right now, because what I want to do is I want to summarize so far where we're at. So we talked about managing calories, managing protein intake. We talked about the value of both of those, also from a macro perspective, but also what's needed for healing. We just touched upon fish oil being more anti-inflammatory, EPA being more vascular, DHA being more brain health, centered around the brain, managing inflammation in the brain. Curcumin being, I love your analogy to creatine. I think that's fantastic, right? So curcumin being what's really making turmeric yellow, what's necessary for the antioxidant effect, right? The third supplement that I wanted to bring about kind of full circle during this acute strategy when we're talking about implementing nutrition is HMB. And what HMB is and how some of the literature is mixed on it as far as are we really getting the changes that we think we are we really preserving muscle mass? So HMB, to kind of round out this idea of acute injury protocol when we talk about managing those first 96 hours, what is HMB? What is its role? And what's your perspective on the best available evidence right now?
Yes. HMB is a metabolite of leucine. And I think it was like you need to take 30, don't quote me on the number, but I believe it's like 30 grams of leucine give you 3 grams of HMB, which is shown in the research to preserve muscle mass loss. So still, from my understanding, HMB really doesn't do anything if you're an active, healthy individual. It's best for those that are going on bed rest or a true decrease in physical activity. So that's number one. And then number two is that it is 3 grams a day that is needed, and it's needed in divided doses in order to have the effective benefit. But let's go back to, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago of where HMB came from. And I believe it came either out of Nestle or Abbott. I'm forgetting it. It was this product called Juven. It was a parenteral or an enteral nutrition. And in the original studies, they saw that cancer, cachectic patients, AIDS, muscle wasting patients stopped losing muscle, even though they were bedridden and wouldn't be able to do anything, utilizing HMB. And through the years, using it in the studies, using it on active people versus inactive people, they found that it helped to preserve their muscle mass loss while they're inactive. I really use it now when that's kind of one of my protocols. When someone becomes injured, right away we'll go on 2 servings a day of HMB, whatever company I can find that has it.
And my understanding of the use of HMB is right. If it's an active adult, negligible effects, but the bed rest, people that, right, where we've used it in the past is someone's immobilized because of surgery. Someone has some really strong post-op protocols that don't allow them to load a particular joint, load a particular limb, which you could equate to potentially being bed rest, because ultimately when they're not with us during rehab, they're sitting on their couch not doing much. So that's where you and I have leveraged HMB. But I want to be very clear and support my understanding with yours that HMB for the active adult is probably not necessary to preserve muscle mass. Is that fair?
Correct. Yeah, I would just say just eating, making sure you're getting you have enough protein on board, and then carbohydrate to support that protein going to your muscle mass, and then creatine. Creatine is just the tried and true. It's my number one supplement. If anything you're going to do, just if you want to get rid of everything else, keep your creatine.
We'll have to, at the end of the show, we're going to have to come back and just be like, what is Danielle's top supplement recommendation that stood the test of time? But we'll put a pin in that one for now. So we've got, I'm thinking like this first 96 hours, this first 4 days, we're really letting the body do its thing from an injury. We're having a conversation and strategy to manage caloric intake while also paying attention to macronutrients. Then as we approach day 3, day 4, we're having a conversation about, hey, we're fish oil, where we at? HMB, is it warranted here based on any protocols or limitations? Curcumin's important. Creatine's important. Is there anything else irregardless of some of the protocols we're going to talk about specific to particular injuries, anything else broad stroke that we would want to include when it comes to day 3, day 4 acute injury management?
Collagen.
Okay, I'm really curious on your take, because I've been seeing some stuff pop around on my social channels of whether or not collagen is beneficial or not when it comes to joint health, tendon health.
Right.
I'm glad you brought this up because I'm kind of at a crossroads of, is collagen what we think it is? Is it a big marketing ploy? Is it really giving us the effects that we think it is? I know Keith Barr and his group, that when it comes to tendinopathies, they've talked about vitamin C paired with collagen. Maybe that's advantageous. So let's actually use this. Let's use this as a segue when we talk about supplementation. Let's just jump into one of our, let's call it injury protocols, and that being tendinopathy and tendon injuries. And I think this is a good intro to what collagen is and everything that comes around that supplement. So let me ask a question here and say, what is the role of collagen in tendinopathies and tendon injuries?
Yeah, so I think it's just, to keep it simple, it just helps with maintaining the integrity of that matrix, that complex, that structure within the tendons and the ligaments. And it can help to strengthen it from what I understand. Now, within what you're saying with muscle protein synthesis, sure, that would make sense because collagen is also not a complete protein. It's missing tryptophan. So remember that whey protein isolate and all your animal proteins, egg and all of that, they're going to be not only complete proteins, but then they also have the right ratios in terms of which proteins are great for helping with muscle protein synthesis, like your branched chain amino acids, right? Leucine, isoleucine, and valine. Tryptophan will come in there to a lesser extent, glutamine and whatnot. I think it's all that collagen, I just look at it from a tissue tensile strength and integrity aspect of it, but not necessarily for your muscle mass or anything else because of that lacking that tryptophan.
Can you shed some light into the role of vitamin C in collagen, and I guess the absorption or the utilization of collagen when vitamin C is added to the collagen supplementation?
Yeah. So I think it is challenging. Oh man, you're challenging me here. It's that vitamin C supports it. It's like the coenzyme for proline, hydroxyproline, and I think it's lysine, the three main collagen amino acids where they're the most highest in the collagen protein. And that vitamin C is like the coenzyme or the activator, make sure that it can incorporate. It helps with the absorption into the tissue.
Got it. So it's fair to say that the collagen is an important supplement when we're talking about tendinopathies, tendon-related injuries, even probably just general soft tissue injuries, which maybe falls into the category of ankle sprains, MCL sprains, maybe even. Is there a role in collagen when we talk about soft tissue injuries such as muscular injuries as well?
Not that I've really seen. I've mostly seen it, for the tendons and ligaments and not necessarily soft tissue.
Okay.
But
so we can bucket.
Not to say that it isn't out there. I haven't seen it.
And that's totally fair. And I appreciate that. And we're not saying you know everything. You're not an encyclopedia. You're just coming from practical experience and a wealth of knowledge. So thank you for just acknowledging it. There may be something out there. And please, audience, don't hold us accountable. If you know of something, please let us know. But we'll say, hey, collagen and vitamin C. If we're going to bucket a supplementation or a protocol into a tendinopathy, that's going to be our mainstay. Is there anything else that comes to mind around tendinopathies or ligament injuries that we would want to include?
No, I mean, it's inflammation. So again, what are your curcumin, right? What are your antioxidants? And maybe we can get into glucosamine and chondroitin. Again, it's a really great supplement. I think it's lost its sexiness because collagen has come around now, but glucosamine and chondroitin are still another great option. In order for it to be most effective, you also want to take that in divided doses, ideally 3, but that's not practical. So at least 2. Then there was something I wanted to mention. Yeah, it takes about 6 weeks too. That's still a thing. If you don't notice a difference in, any pain or like clicking, let's say in your knee or whatnot, then you probably are a non-responder to glucosamine. Adam, there's also some research that the vitamin C doesn't even really need to be on board, or you don't need to take a vitamin C with your collagen. Like maybe if you had vitamin C in your breakfast and then you take your collagen, so it's kind of, you might not, I don't know. And it's not like it's going to hurt. And it's not like it's a lot. It's still, I think it's like 15 or 30 or 60 milligrams of vitamin C. So it's not huge. So if you have an orange and you take, you eat an orange and you take your collagen, that's sufficient from my understanding.
So it sounds like if you're throwing in some collagen either into a shake or you're taking it alongside even just probably a basic multivitamin has more than enough vitamin C in there for you as well. So we're not asking, say, hey, you got to go take a emergency every time you want to take collagen. It's just being mindful. Hey, if we're trying to optimize, right? Everything's always about optimization and best practice. If you're trying to optimize collagen uptake and really get the maximum benefit, it may be advantageous to include some small dose of vitamin C, and the number I heard you say 15, 20, 30 milligrams, something small like that.
Yeah, I think it's small. I can't remember off the top of my head. Don't quote me again, but
I'll hold you to it.
Yeah, okay.
So let's pivot here and go. So we talked about kind of in one breath, we talked about tendon injuries, collagen. We talked about maybe cartilage and articular injuries, glucosamine. What was the second one you said there? I can't pronounce it.
Chondroitin.
Okay, so those two for our cartilage injuries. So if you're thinking, hey, you've got chronic patellofemoral syndrome, you've got a cartilage defect because you're an NBA player, a basketball player, right? Something that may help smooth out the surface of that joint to reduce inflammation. That can be advantageous. Let's go to muscle injuries here. I don't know if there's other than what we've already talked about. I'm not sure if there's something specific we would want to consider when we think about what muscle is, muscle being protein, muscle needing protein synthesis, muscle needing blood flow, right? Like, is there anything else that we haven't talked about that we might want to consider when we have, let's say, a hamstring strain?
Yeah, I think the same thing, looking at our antioxidants and hydration. We haven't hit on hydration yet, but that's another thing going into surgery, coming off an injury, any of our injuries, right? Especially like our what's the word I'm looking for? But ankles and wrist injuries, all of that, right? The low blood flow type of injuries. So yeah, in order to help that process, let's get in the hydration. Same thing with the soft tissue injuries. Let's just make sure the body and the tissues are staying hydrated so they don't have to work harder than they already are to recover. So yeah, I would say we forgot about that.
We talked about, let's just summarize and say, hey, let's not forget about hydration. We're talking about supplements. We're talking about food. Let's just not forget about hydration and the value that it has overall for the system. That's important. I think that's just a mainstay of athlete performance. There's two other injuries that are a little bit more specific and definitely want to talk about them with you. The first one is bone injuries, because bone tissue in itself has its different constituents needed to grow and rebuild. Also, brain injuries, that being of concussions. I don't know where your knowledge base is on nutrition and supplementation for concussions, but maybe we can just bucket that and say, hey, just brain health, what you know from that. So let's go to the first question of, what are some nutritional considerations we should take when we have a bone fracture, a stress fracture, or even a stress reaction to a bone?
So I think one is, we sometimes forget, right? We want to go all to the higher level real fast, is do an assessment. How are they getting enough calories, right? Because then we can look at, is it this low energy availability? And that's why that's happening. And so are they eating enough? And then from there, let's break down in the macros. Okay, then what is it? We know, again, that we need to have enough protein on board in order to have the raw materials, the amino acids, to keep the bone healthy. And then we can get into the macronutrients. And the biggest ones are calcium and vitamin D, but I think we forget about magnesium and a few of the other ones. Vitamin A can come in there, inflammation and homocysteine and B. So we can look at that as well. But I think where we first need to start is overall calories, and is there any overtraining or overreaching happening? And then do we have enough protein on board? Are they absorbing that protein? Can we look at labs and see what their total protein is, their albumin, and are those numbers within the normal range, or are they on the lower end of the range? Is there any digestive issues? So do we need to work on some gut health? Do we need to add in some probiotics or some glutamine or some digestive enzymes to help break that protein down in the right way? Maybe, again, basics. Are they chewing? Are they chewing the food to support their digestive system, right? Or are they just inhaling it and we get 2-3 bites and then we just take it down? So it's starting back from basics and the macronutrients, and then looking at all the other micronutrients that we have to have on board. And now we have all this testing available to us. So we can do a micronutrient test instead of just looking at general labs and getting a comprehensive metabolic panel, which is going to have your total albumin and your albumin, but we can do a micronutrient test and see what's going on there. I mentioned inflammation. So that's where your EPA and your DHA can come in. Is that inflammation blocking certain absorption of nutrients? Are there some genetic predispositions? We haven't gotten into that. And, over the last couple of years, I've been trying to increase my knowledge on genes and what they say. And are they expressed? And if they're expressed or turned on in a certain way that would be negative for us, is that preventing us from absorbing and utilizing certain nutrients? So I would look at that, and then, yes, micronutrients, and not just looking at calcium and vitamin D. Look at your magnesium, look at vitamin A, look at zinc, look at the homocysteine and inflammation, and take a look at B6. Because B6, B12, B9, right, they help with recycling homocysteine and its metabolism in the body. And so sometimes if those are low, 9 out of 10 times, you correct that. You can correct the homocysteine. It'll also help with, the inflammation.
You talked about calcium, you talked about magnesium. Those are two popular supplements that when you have a bone injury, I've had doctors in the past prescribe certain calcium, had doctors say, hey, let's provide a magnesium supplementation. I know there's one particular brand of calcium supplementation you despise, that being Tums, as a calcium supplementation, right?
Yes,
and the reason I just want to provide a little context, and probably leads to the question you talked about, gut health, right? And the absorption of these nutrients that we're providing. So it's curious where you take this question relative to, well, first off, the quality of the supplementation. In particular, let's talk about calcium and magnesium, because there's multiple variants of that out there to the market, but then also how that's integrated with the bioavailability or the absorption in the gut and why that's important.
So I think starting with, the forms, right now, the research is telling us that the chelated forms, or where the mineral is attached to an amino acid, that's a best way of getting it absorbed in the body. When we do the citrates or the salts, let's say, then they external, let's call them, they kind of just go through the system. So less is absorbed. Whereas if we attach them to an amino acid or chelate them, that's been shown to help get into the cells, get into the tissues a lot better. So looking for those types, so like a glycinated magnesium bisglycinate, calcium bisglycinate, calcium malate, those are going to be your better options. Not to say that, but at the same time, those are going to be, from what I've learned with supplementation, is that they're already big molecules, magnesium, and then it's bigger as attaching it to the amino acid. So sometimes you might have to do a calcium citrate, but I would be careful, because I've had people that have ended up with, I've had friends and colleagues, they've ended up with kidney stones if they were on too much calcium citrate. So that's another reason why to stay away from the salts, at least for calcium. Also, too, you got to be careful with calcium, because if you don't really need it, or you don't have your vitamin D or your magnesium on board, there's now been some, maybe not new research, but now more and more research is coming out that calcium will deposit along the arterial wall, and we'll get that calcification. It'll deposit in other areas if you don't have magnesium. Really is the best for helping calcium to get absorbed. So what I've learned is that it is the glycinated or the chelated forms that you want. And then from there, you want to look at the amounts that you need. Magnesium, you always want to start off slowly, because it does have, whether it's a bisglycinated form or the citrate form, it can have a osmotic pressure on your gut, leading to diarrhea, basically, because it's going to pull that salt is going to pull water into the bowels, and cause diarrhea. So, and bisglycinate can do that. It just won't do it at higher amounts. So you want to work your way up into your magnesium. And then your other leading question on that one was, and why the Tums? Yeah. And then with the gut, right? So where does the majority of our vitamin and mineral happen? It's in the small intestine. So, And then we've also learned through the years that it starts in the stomach. And if you have too much hydrochloric acid, HCl, that can deactivate some of these minerals. If you don't have enough, same thing can happen. So you need that nice balance of acidity in your stomach. And so with the Tums coming in, now that it's a calcium carbonate, and that's to alkalize or neutralize that stomach acid, but we don't know if the stomach acid is high or if the stomach acid is low. So if the stomach acid is already low and then we add the calcium carbonate on it, then are we affecting other minerals like magnesium, like iron and whatnot in order to get absorbed? So that's where I don't like Tums as an option. And it also doesn't have magnesium. So then how well is it getting absorbed into the system? And then also knowing that if calcium is free and we're consuming too much calcium, that it can now deposit in other areas of the body. So it gets kind of complicated, and it's not as simple as let's just take this one thing. We want to know the right amount. We want to know the right form. If we can do some lab work and see what our clients are low in, maybe it's not even calcium that they need. It's vitamin D or it's magnesium. So those are all the things that we want to take into consideration when we're making these recommendations.
Perfect scenario would be we can have access to a phlebotomist, we can draw some labs, and we have the resources to really dial it in, right? That's best case scenario. That's what you've had access to.
Yes.
Not best case scenario, and probably most folks is, hey, I don't have access to get labs drawn. I can't afford them right now, but I want to do something to help optimize the healing for a bone injury. What would be your recommendation with not over prescribing or blatantly throwing something at a injury without fully under the full scope? But I want to give our listeners something to walk away with, saying, hey, if you can't dial it in with a lab test and you can't exactly see what's going on under the hood, what can they do?
Yeah. And going back to your overall nutrition, are you eating enough? Are you getting enough in terms of your antioxidants, think color, spices, herbs, vegetables, fruits, and do you have enough protein on board? So then at least you're getting all that stuff from your food. And if you know you have some digestive issues, or then maybe you could look at blindly throwing a probiotic at it, maybe taking a digestive enzyme with each meal, to help. I think those are, because I don't see any of those things really hurting the body from a supplementation standpoint. I don't know if we need to go in and get a calcium magnesium supplement or anything like that. I say just, really honing in on your diet if you don't have any of the labs. Now, if you do want something, I would say make sure that your calcium also has magnesium. So it's maybe like a complex where you see that there's magnesium. Oh, I keep forgetting. I'm forgetting a nutrient, vitamin K. That's another one. And vitamin K, one of the forms of vitamin K is produced in the large intestine, in the colon, by fermentation of our food products. So again, gut health is going to become extremely important, but maybe it's also, if you really feel like you need to take something, maybe it's a combo, like an osteoplex or whatever it would be called. And then you have your vitamin K, your vitamin D, your calcium, your magnesium, and what other nutrients that company thinks is necessary for bone health. Maybe that's the way to go.
There's one nutrient, I want to wrap this up on the bone discussion. There's one nutrient that I've heard you mention that I didn't hear mentioned today, and that was copper. What is there a role that copper plays with bone health and bone injuries?
Yeah, and I think it's more because of copper's role in collagen. And it is, I even did a presentation on this, it's been a year or two, but in the collagen matrix, copper comes in just kind of similar to vitamin C, but in a different, I don't know if in a different step. I can kind of see it in my head, but copper comes in along with vitamin C to support collagen formation. And so, yes, we also know that collagen is also part of the bone matrix. So that could also be a part, but it's definitely a lot smaller of a nutrient and maybe not as prevalent, but it could also be part of the equation that we don't want to not necessarily rule out.
Excellent. I appreciate that. How about let's pivot here from bone and let's talk about if you can, and I'm going to leave this open ended. I don't expect I don't have any expectations because I don't think we've ever really explored nutritional strategies together when it comes to concussion and it comes to brain injury. But I feel like it's something we should talk about because maybe we didn't see it as much in basketball and soccer. Maybe more so you saw it in soccer, but definitely those that are part of football or more contact injuries probably see it more. So really just curious if you have any insights or how you would maybe approach if you had a concussion today. What would you do to help support the nutrition side of that?
Yeah, it's important. And I do feel like I have the most basic understanding of concussion because there's just so much more to it now. And the research is really blown up. But the little that I do know, my go-tos are if we can do some type of omega check, if not, put some basic EPA, DHA on board, a nice quality omega-3 fish oil. Again, because we're looking at trying to heal the brain with food. And what do we know? What happens is that it's the neurons that get disrupted and that integrity and that signaling within the brain that gets disrupted. So what are nutrients that we know help with neurogeneration or neuro regeneration and neuroplasticity? So I would say getting a lot of your anthocyanins on board because they've even been shown, they say that we can't regrow brain cells, but some of the research that I've gone through is that, yes, we can if you have those it's anthocyanins, it's the blue purple fruits and also green tea. Well, your EGCG is considered that antho, right? Blue, or antho is your antioxidant, cyanin meaning blue. So getting a lot of those in to help with that neuroregenerative processes. And then of course the DHA, right, to help keeping that brain inflammation down. Curcumin can also come in there. So magnesium, there's some new research on magnesium threonate versus glycinate. That threonate can better cross the blood-brain barrier. And we know that magnesium, right, is involved in 300 enzymatic processes in the body. And one of them is being nerve function. Maybe some magnesium and specifically magnesium threonate, get that on board. Our B vitamins, right? We know that acetylcholine is one of the main neurotransmitters for neuron signaling. So choline is essentially a B vitamin, right? Acetylcholine. So maybe some type of phosphatidylcholine or there's this liquid choline that I like. It'll come to me. So there are a couple different forms of choline and some have a better function than others. Eggs, I know egg yolks. I think we're getting better at it, but eggs are our highest, egg yolks are one of our highest sources of choline. So that would be something to add in. So it's really all about what are the foods and the supplements we know that help with our neurons and overall nerve health, and then what also helps with decreasing inflammation. So those would be my top. Then you got to look at we talked about this earlier, again, going back to overall calories, what's the main fuel source for the brain? Glucose, right? Carbohydrates. So I would say making sure that, at some point, now I wonder if this is where my lack of knowledge, I think, is there a specific time period for the glucose? Does the brain need to be maybe starved or a calorie reduction for a little bit to calm down? It doesn't need all that metabolism to process the glucose. Or do we really need to make sure we have the carbs on board so that the brain can recover and do what it needs to do and has the carbohydrate for it? And then of course, hydration, because again, the brain's our bodies are 60-70% water, and then the brain is same thing with the brain. It needs that hydration in order for that signaling and that fluid to bring all those nutrients in and take all the bad stuff, wash all of it away. Another thing too is creatine. That now in the last 5 years, I did I did this 12 years ago, and creatine was starting to come out as, or maybe it already had been, but I had come across a lot of research in putting together this presentation that I didn't know about in creatine for brain health. And now in the last 5 years, I feel like it's everywhere. So that would be something else to look into, as well as making sure that you have some creatine on board in order to help with that. Because the brain, right? It's just like our muscles are working and utilizing ATP, so is our brain. And that creatine can come in and help make that process a bit more efficient or stronger.
I've heard the same and read the same about the creatine and its effects on the brain. So I would second that. And that was well said. Like you touched upon a lot of things that were important to consider with brain health. And I just appreciate you just highlighting, like, here, there's things that I know that are important for nerve health. They're important for overall healing. Would probably warrant that we should revisit these when we're talking about concussion or talking about a brain injury to help optimize that. And by no means, you and I are not TBI experts. We are not neurologists, but we do come across some of those injuries in our career. And I just felt it was important to highlight that because some people probably see it more than we do.
Yes.
So
I agree.
Let's summarize. I want to come back and just make sure we're on this journey of rehab and managing it from a nutritional perspective. We talked about the acute phase and allowing the body to do its thing, implement some supplements such as curcumin, HMB, fish oil. We talked about some specific injuries that may warrant certain supplementation over others, but you can clearly see there's a lot of crossover between them. And really speaking, like, aside from maybe tendon injuries having increased collagen, bone injuries having a deep dive into calcium, magnesium, vitamin D, vitamin K, all the minerals that are important for bone health, we're still kind of seeing similar processes and recommendations across them. The question I have for you is, when we talk about these plans and these programs for nutrition intervention during rehab, as activity starts to increase, they're out of that acute phase, subacute phase, they're really just kind of in that return to play process, right? Calories got to start to come up. We got to start making sure we have the energy supply. Is there a point in time where some of those supplements, let's say anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, or tissue-specific supplements, that we then decide to pull back and really focus on a food-centered strategy as if they were not in the rehab process? Is there a time and point when you do that, or are you in the camp of, no, let's continue even beyond because we know that the tissue's still healing and remodeling even if they return to play?
I kind of leave this open for me. It just depends. It's more of like that lawyer answer. It depends. It's situational. Seeing where the athlete is. Are they going to ramp up? Do they need to ramp up quite quickly? What are they willing to do? What are they willing to take? So yeah, it's looking at what do they need, what's happening on the field or on the court. What are they still willing to do? What did we take away in order to make room for some of these extra anti-inflammatories? So do we need to retest if we have that option so that we can maybe adjust vitamin D, adjust the nutrients that we can take? Could we pull a multivitamin back on board? That way we can get rid of some of the higher dose, mega dosing of the individual nutrients. So yeah, I would say it just all kind of depends on the situation. What the athlete wants to do and is willing to do.
Perfect. Now, there's two questions I put a pin in, and I want to come back to it. The first one, I'm going to give you a preface so you can choose which one you want to go down. The first one is just a dietitian's perspective on NSAIDs, where you're currently at with that as far as the management of injuries. And then also, I want to wrap this up to say, hey, what would be our supplementation recommendation or list that, hey, these are probably our top things that have withstood the test of time from research and had profound effects, and we're still learning things about, right? Just like we talked about creatine and the magnesium, the new form of magnesium that's crossing the blood-brain barrier, right? I want to wrap that things up there. So where do you want to go first? You want to go NSAIDs or you want to go supplementation?
Let's go NSAIDs.
Okay, so let's talk about NSAIDs. And let me preface this by saying it's very common practice. And I want to be very clear. We are not medical doctors. We are not pharmacists. We are not recommending or not recommending medication. We have just seen through our careers, in the world of sports medicine and dealing with injuries, NSAIDs are commonly prescribed when you have an acute injury. And again, we're not going to talk about the pharmacokinetics of the various forms of NSAIDs, but I really wanted to highlight your perspective because it's valuable and there's some negative effects that come with NSAIDs. So I just want to make sure we are talking about it from a holistic approach when we do decide or do not decide to implement them. So in the context of NSAIDs, from what you understand and why or why not you may be on board or not on board for the implementation of them, what is your perspective on the use of NSAIDs as it ties into nutrition and rehab?
Sure. So from what I've been learning over the years is that it can decrease inflammation, but then it's also causing like maybe maybe a way to put it would be like tiny micro tears at the gut lining. And we know that like 80% of our immunity and, happens in the gut. So now if we're, decreasing inflammation somewhere else, are we instigating it in another area? So really, and then some of these stronger anti-inflammatories like diclofenac and Celebrex and they're very, very, they're even harder from my understanding. I might be getting this wrong, but then ibuprofen, on our gut wall. And then that could over time, that constant amount and load of these NSAIDs on our systems could then cause issues elsewhere. So we really want to maintain that integrity of our gut. So that's why, are there some other, anti-inflammatory things that we can do that aren't going to have that negative side effect? Because then it's almost like you get stuck in this rat wheel, right? Because then you take something to decrease inflammation, but then it's causing a disruption somewhere else. It's like constantly picking a scab. And now it's just, you're never going to heal. You're never going to get that inflammation to go away. So then you're always going to have to take something.
It's like the chicken or the egg, right? Like sometimes do you want to keep doing it? Like if that's like, if you had success with an NSAID in the past, like, and let's just use a common one, right? Like an ankle sprain. Ankle sprain tends to swell. Really tough time getting the swelling out of an ankle because it's distal to the heart. It's the most distal part. When you talk about gravity, it's pulling the fluid down. So ankle swelling just sits when you sprain it. I have seen and I've had great success with the use of NSAIDs in an acute setting where after you've given it a couple days to let the really tissue heal, really see the magnitude of how severe is this, how much swelling is a big indicator of the severity of not only the tissue, but also the health of the system, right? I've seen plenty of players sprain their ankle and 5 days later, it looks like they didn't do anything. And then I've had other players over the course of the first 4 days, it just continues to build and build and build. And it shows that, hey, maybe they just don't have the strongest immune system or strongest lymphatic system, right? So it tells a story. That's why you and I are in this camp of maybe we should just let the system do its thing first before we make any radical interventions, which is really tough in pro sports because everybody wants you better now and everybody wants you to be fixed as soon as possible. So that's why I think the recommendation of applying this broad stroke of NSAIDs does become some of standard practice. But your point of, well, if we know it's affecting gut health, and what we just talked about throughout this conversation is the implementation of supplements and the implementation of other nutrients and minerals that may be advantageous for healing or remodeling, but if the gut health is constantly being battered down with NSAIDs, like, are we even really able to maximize the other protocols that we're thinking about from a holistic approach?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then, down the road, because now this barrier, this system is broken down. Now, are we going to continue to have more injuries? Maybe not the same injury, but something different because we were preventing one thing and we just created another. It's like, maybe it's even another analogy would be like, well, yeah, I have an Achilles tendon injury. I'm at rehab, but don't just work on the one ankle or the strength on one. We have to work both. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It's definitely problematic right now because, and think about it, that's why so our gut is a muscle, right? And we forget about this. Our stomach and our intestines, they're a muscle. And what do we do when we feel a muscle strain or, right, a pull in our hammy or something? We're like, so we rest, right? But we'll take NSAIDs and we'll have diarrhea or constipation and all this stuff and all these GI issues. And we're like, we just ignore it. Like, that's what's supposed to happen. That's normal. That's our body telling us something. Maybe that's that muscle's way of saying, this isn't a good thing for me.
That's a great analogy. I never thought of gut health being like, you go to the gym, do a bunch of bicep curls, your biceps sore the next day. Your body's like, oh yeah, that's expected, but not taking the perspective of, hey, if I'm having GI pain or having, like you said, diarrhea or frequent bathroom visits, perhaps that's the body's way of saying something's not right. But you're right. Most of us just ignore it and chalk it up of saying, it'll pass. It's something I ate, right? And that could be a whole nother conversation about why certain foods upset the stomach versus others. So that was fantastic. I I appreciate the perspective from a experienced dietitian like yourself and thinking holistically 360. Yes, we're not saying, and I want to be very clear, we are not saying NSAIDs aren't important. They don't have their place. They certainly do. And I've certainly worked with doctors where we decided, you know what, this is what we need. And then in 48 hours, our biggest problem, that being swelling and pain, is now gone. Now we can do the things we knew. Like, there is a time and a place for it. I think where you and I share a similar perspective is maybe we don't want to just blanket every injury and say, hey, let's throw an NSAID at it. And I'm not saying docs do that. I'm not saying doctors we've worked with do that. It's just something we've observed over our careers that, hey, let's just think about this just like we would any other intervention.
Yes, we want to be careful with some of these things because they do cause other issues. So we want to be very goal specific and goal oriented with them and really narrow it down to make sure that we're not causing, any.
Agreed. And I want to be clear. I think you and I have a bias that we always think holistically and how things are connected and systems thinking, which may not be the traditional medical model, like allopathic model, like more. So, hey, if there's a problem, here's the solution. Whereas you and I share this thought, like, no, like things are connected, interconnected, and that's where you've gone down the path of functional integrative medicine and dietetics. So let's be very clear, like, that is just our bias and opinions on the matter, and we certainly appreciate the allopathic model too and understand that it has its place.
Yes, absolutely. Well said.
All right, let's round this out around the bone injury. Sorry, not bone injury, just injuries in general in rehab, and let's give something to really walk away with and say, hey, in your entire career, you've done the gamut of labs, you've done the gamut of supplementation, building meal plans, right? But everyone wants to know, hey, what supplement can I take to fix this, right? How am I going to live longer? Can I take this supplement? So if, let's say, I don't want to limit you to a number, but I don't want to have an exhaustive list. Let's just start with 5 and see where it goes to. If you had to pick your top 5 supplements that would be beneficial for any rehab case and just overall performance, what would you recommend?
Yes. Okay. So creatine, I already said, is my number 1. Leucine for that muscle maintenance, muscle building. Beets. We didn't really talk about beets, but beets could also be a part of all this, right? Increase that nitric oxide, which increases that vasculature, those blood vessels, which then helps blood flow and things get through. So that could help with, getting to the tendons and that, getting the nutrients to those injuries. Same thing with brain injury, right? That increase in blood flow to the brain, really get those nutrients in. I do like glutamine. Glutamine's still a good one for immune, again, that gut health. Really, glutamine's a really good one. It's there in muscle, but more so of our gut health. It's the main amino acid that keeps the lattice of our GI tract closed together. So glutamine is in there. And then what am I going to put for number 5? I would say fish oil would come up because I think a lot of us, what I see with a lot of the labs that I've drawn, we don't eat enough, maybe cold water, fatty fish or seafood, or we're doing a lot of things to our body where we are just really we don't have that right ratio of those omega-3s to omega-6s. So I'd throw fish oil in there.
What is to the best of your knowledge and recommendation, what would be the appropriate ratio EPA?
Yeah, so you definitely want to test this, but it's 3 to 1. And right now in our country, I think depending on the literature you look at, we're either a 16 to 1 omega-6 to omega-3 or a 20 to 1. Because if you think of all the oils, right, like soy oil, corn oil, what's the other popular one right now? Sunflower seed oil, especially in all of our chips and all of that, and a lot of our packaged foods. So we get a lot more omega-6 than we do omega-3.
What about the ratio EPA DHA? Is there a sweet spot for that? Because I do see supplements they're all over the place relative to what they should be. And I imagine, like we talked about earlier, maybe if you have a brain injury, you want higher DHA, but if you're just everyday supplement, maybe you're talking a different type of ratio. Where's your perspective and stance on the EPA DHA ratio?
Well, it's been a while since I've looked at the research, but what it was saying back a few years ago, you want a 2 to 1 ratio of EPA to DHA. So if you got 2 grams EPA, you want 1 gram DHA. Now, if you have a brain injury, you might want to flip that and go the other way, or take your fish oil and maybe take, again, is taking a lot of pills, but this is just for explanation's sake. So take a pure DHA supplement, but the research is a 2-to-1. But I have noticed that, and this is where the testing has become helpful, because I have seen, so if they're higher in the EPA or the DHA, it's nice now that there are these different supplements out, because then we could say, okay, yeah, what can we do from food? But then, oh, you don't need this one that's so much higher in DHA or EPA. We could try this version and see if we can boost it up that way.
I can appreciate that. Yeah, it's context dependent. I appreciate. So if we say your 5 were creatine, they were leucine.
Oh yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. You're asking my 5 again. Okay, so I did creatine, leucine, beets, glutamine, and fish oil. And I feel, even though I know I said 5, I feel as though I'm forgetting one. Oh, I got to throw whey protein isolate in there. Would be, yeah, that would be my go-to protein powder.
Are most products are whey protein concentrate, correct?
You got to look. Most of them, they might be a combo. They might be one or the other, but you want the whey protein isolate. And it is going to be a little bit more expensive because of the process to get it.
Excellent. I appreciate that. So now you're going to have everyone go take a bunch of creatine, a bunch of beets, a bunch of fish oil, leucine.
You're just going to feel amazing.
I want to wrap this up around advice around your relative to your space. And I think this is a hard question for you to answer because you're so knowledgeable and so experienced. But I think it's important to just have some practical advice as well. You know, what have you found in your career to be the most important piece of advice, whether it's an athlete, sometimes even coaches are coming to you, athletes' wives, athletes' husbands, right? What's the most important piece of advice you're giving to the athletes and coaches?
Man, gosh, because everything's everywhere. So I guess, again, it's nothing fun or sexy, but it's like figure out and find your balance along with what works for you. It's something that you can stick to.
I think that's
just it's simple.
It's simple. That's the hardest thing is finding what works for you, though, right? That's probably the hardest battle, right? There's all the fad diets, the trends, which lifestyle is more advantageous than others, and at the end of the day, it's just what works for you. I think that I would share that sentiment.
Yeah, I mean, we have all this research, and we keep saying, again, as I said earlier, evidence-based, but a lot of this research is done in a lab. That's not a real world. So I don't get me wrong. I appreciate literature. It's extremely important, but some of the stuff that we're learning, it's because someone was running on a treadmill. Is that what they're doing out on the court or the football field? No. So it's, yeah, I mean, I could say, yeah, everybody needs carbohydrates, 80. So that's why I'm always saying, like, at least 80%, and the majority are going to. And if you are going to go vegan, or if you are going to, go to keto, just make sure you're getting all your other nutrients, in a different way, or you're getting what you need. I've had some athletes that were extremely successful on a vegan diet, and I had some that were not, because their diets were poor before even going, wanting to eat vegan. And then they're just not getting enough nutrients, and they're losing weight, and they're tired, and it's hard for them to eat because they're not educating themselves. So yeah, it's finding that balance, finding what works for you, and whatever works for you, know that I'm going to come and I'm just going to figure out how I can help and support you. I'm not going to, unless it's really detracting from your health and you're really starting to decline, I will come in and be a little bit more, kind of put my foot down and say, I don't think this is, can we do something different? But otherwise, I am going to just be there and be your support, and you're a person to bounce questions off of and give ideas and suggestions so that you can be successful.
Speaking of being successful, I feel that nutrition and dietetics is hard to show gains and wins and making progress, because you're asking for like long-term changes, especially when you start considering lab values, body composition, like that stuff takes time, right? How are you helping your athletes find the wins throughout the process when they're trying to get to that big win of losing weight, putting on muscle mass, changing some lab values? What are the small wins along the way for you?
Yeah, I think it's starting with, again, like that KISS principle, and then the SMART goals, right? And just picking one or two things. So just this past season, I had a couple athletes that have hydrated more so than they ever have before. And we're noticing that they were just feeling better. And that's all it was. And now I get it. I get bored with it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is just hydration. What else? Like, again, I get it. I want to do bigger picture and stuff too. And I got to take myself down. But I was like, oh, it was so simple. That's all it was. It was just, I'm consuming more water and now I'm not as exhausted during the game or after the game, and I'm feeling better throughout the day. I had another player that was cutting back on their fast food and trying new foods, and was realizing that they do like more foods and increasing and creating that variety and a more healthier variety into their diet. And that was a huge small win. Now, was it in that moment like affecting body composition or, I don't know, because it was so small, but in that moment, yeah. And over time, doing those little things, we all know, right? Like who is it? BJ Fogg, little habits or little tiny habits or something like that over time will lead to the bigger ones. We're just hoping that it will happen sooner rather than later, so we can get everybody on board and get that championship.
The championship is what we all want, right?
Exactly.
Well, this was great. I feel like we've got a good collab coming here where we could really create some good material for people relative to some like specific protocols around injuries, around rehab process, how to tie in loading parameters from loading parameters from physical therapy and performance training to then complement, hey, when are we pulling back on calories? When are we adding in certain nutritional elements to optimize healing, optimize performance gains? Like I think we might have something there, but we'll put a pin in that one too. Final bit that I love to just always ask, because some people who are listening to the show want to work in sports. Some are looking to jump sports, one league from the other. So I think it's important to kind of just also talk about the fun stuff that goes on in sports to just give some color like that. You and I certainly have enjoyed our time working in professional sports. What has been we talked about the World Series and the World Cup, and we can say the answer for that here too. But is there another particular sporting event that you've been a part of that resonates as one of your favorites?
No, I haven't. Those two really, the World Series and the World Cup really top it. They were on another level. Just the energy of the stadiums, and it was so amazing. I can't say. My next would be getting to an Olympics.
I like that.
Hopefully.
You got LA next door, so maybe.
Yes, I know.
Mine's the World Cup. Honestly, I think that's just a bucket list item for me. So anyone over at US Soccer internationally, if you're listening, World Cup 2026, I'll be available.
Darcy.
How about listen, within the World Cup, I mean, working for US Soccer, you've also had international travel. What was some of your favorite cities or top city you traveled to?
Yes, New York. I love New York. I just had every single time I've been there, just the greatest time, just walking up and down the streets, hitting a show, eating the food, the different restaurants, the shopping, the architecture. There's just always something to do there. Just love New York. I love New Orleans. The food is fantastic there. Yes, I love New Orleans. More so for the food. I'm not big into like the jazz music scene, although I do appreciate it. And we were there for the jazz festival once, and I got a chance to walk around during the day before the game and hit some stages, and that was pretty fantastic. We go to some fun cities, and Miami is always a great city. When we get some time, it's always great to be able to go to the beach. That's fantastic. Yeah. So even though the travel is just horrendous, like those are then the fun things where now that I'm right now not in NBA, I'm like, oh, I'm going to miss going to New Orleans once a year, in New York and Miami. I still love San Francisco. It definitely has lost its luster with a lot of the stores closing and all the stuff happening. But yeah, we go to some pretty great fun cities. With our travel. Sometimes it stinks because we don't get to stay there for very long. We're in and out, in less than 16 hours or whatever, or 36. So that's not enjoyable. But when we do, we get some good, we can get in some good downtime activities.
I like all those, but New Orleans, New Orleans, I think actually goes in the bottom of my, I like the food. You judge a city by food and getting an city experience. I judge it on a couple other things. So New Orleans just doesn't check my box for it, but I can appreciate the food aspect.
Yeah. So what are yours? What are your top three then?
Oh, I judge the ability to get outside. Denver, Miami, and Atlanta.
Yeah, those are good too.
So, and all of those have good food scenes. All of those have stuff to do, but also Denver, I like to get out when I was working in professional sports, just to get outside. I would like to go for a run. So Denver, Atlanta, and Miami. Who doesn't want to run by the water in Miami? Atlanta, you get to run along the Beltline, run through Piedmont Park. Denver, you get to run along the river right there. So all of those for me were cool.
Yeah, those are good ones too.
Well, hey, this was awesome. Now that you're a free agent, if anyone wants to recruit you to come work for their team, or they simply want to learn more from you,
available.
how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I'm not big on my social media, but of course I have LinkedIn and I do have an Instagram. I don't even know my handle. I think it's Danielle RDN. Yes, Danielle RDN. So those are the two biggest platforms I'm on. I'm on Twitter, but I'm not active anymore. I'm sorry, X. Oh, yeah, those are the best ways to get a hold of me, or, shoot me an email, Danielle LaFata at yahoo.com. Happy to connect and chat.
Perfect. Well, hey, this was awesome. I am glad we got to talk about this because it's been on my docket for a while. So thank you for sharing everything. There's so much more I do want to talk to you about. Probably have to get you on for part 2, especially the integrative and functional side of things, because that's super savvy and interesting to me. But thank you for giving us all the insight when it comes to sports rehab.
Yeah, thanks. This was a lot of fun. I enjoy talking about it.